Hello and welcome to my new course, Loose Watercolors. We are going to be using primarily the Holbein brand, Holbein? I think you say it Holbein. And as well as Winsor Newton and Opus brand, which is a local brand. So this is my massive palette of all my colors I have here. I really love the Holbein brand because they are super vibrant. They're probably the most vibrant and closest to acrylic ink that I've found for watercolor. So I'm just using a basic graphite pencil, 5B graphite, and just kind of sketching out where I want my flowers. The key to keeping your sketch loose is to hold the pencil high up on the shaft and just really gently move it around and just kind of give it some character. We're not pressing hard or anything, we're not doing anything definitive. This is just to get a basic idea of kind of the shape you want and where you want your flowers. One thing to keep in mind is your composition, and the rule of threes is a really good basic composition to follow, basically blocking out your piece into a grid of 3x3 and going in one of the corners of that. I'll show a little graphic on the left here. So now I've got a very general idea of where I want everything. So I'm going to take my watercolor brush, and I'm just using a medium-sized watercolor brush. I believe it is a size 4. I have 2 water dishes because you dip it in the first one to get all the paint off, and dip it in the second one so that it's actually clean. But we're just going to do a really nice light wash over where we want the flowers, just to wet the paper mostly, and so we can see what we're doing. Because if you just use straight water, you're not going to be able to see where you even put the water down. So again, hold the brush higher up on the shaft of the brush, and this will allow you to work with your wrist more than, or work with like your whole arm more than your wrist. Don't rest your hand on your paper, just let your finger or let your arm do the movements. So we've taken, this is Opera, Quinacridone Opera by Holbein. And we're just dabbing it at the base of the flower and creating where we're going to block out the shadows in our flower. It's a good idea to have a paper towel because sometimes you can oversaturate your paper. And if you're using a really good brand of paper, like I'm using Arches here. This is a 140-pound hot press by Arches. And Arches can handle a fair bit. But if you're going for a lot of water, you're going to want to go to a 300-pound. And we're just keeping on adding in layers of this Opera with a little bit of Quinacridone Violet, again by Holbein. Now this is the fun part. Just take some water and just splash it all over the place. Just go wild. You really want to, this is what's going to allow you to have a loose composition, because it's unpredictable now. Now you don't know where your color is going to go, and that's a lot of fun. It keeps you from being too rigid. I find that if I just throw some water and some ink, or some paint on the paper, it allows me to just kind of not really care so much about where I'm putting everything down, because it's really easy with watercolor to get bogged down in the details and trying to be specific. This is a Opus brand burnt orange and cadmium yellow deep that I've mixed together to make a nice sort of peachy pink. As you can see, my palette's a bit of a gong show, which is a good thing, because then you're never actually getting one color, because it's boring if you're always working with the same one color. If it all mixes kind of together a little bit, then you'll never really be working with the same color. Now I'm taking a bit of, this is Daniel Smith Amazonite green, I believe it is, and just kind of blocking out where I want the stems and the base of the flower. And it's okay if it mixes with the pink, because it makes a bit of brown, and we can always add in more water. Just start really light though, so that you know exactly where you want your stems, and then go in with the darker. This is Opus brand Paraline green. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I only ever read these colors. I don't actually know how to say any of this. And again, just really let your arms loose. Don't let your body get too rigid either. I find it helps actually, this sounds super weird, but I find it helps to do some like finger exercises, like squeeze your hand into a fist and then release it and open it up as wide as it can, and do like wrist circles and elbow circles, because it helps your forearms loosen up too, so you're not so stiff when you're laying down the paint. I do this when I do acrylic as well, because it really helps. And we're just kind of blocking out some more areas, because I mean the flowers look pretty, but it's just not enough for me. I like a little more. And again, just splashing it around. Use the water to mix in all of your little splatters, and use different sizes of brushes for your splatters too, because then it's not so uniform, it's a little more dynamic. This is a Japanese calligraphy brush, which I really like using for larger washes. This is olive green that I'm just dabbing in, olive green by Opus brand. I try to use at least 3 different colors in the flowers and 3 different colors in the leaves, just so that they never really look the same, and it also just adds all of those highlights and lowlights that you want. Because I find one thing with watercolor that I struggle with is getting depth, because watercolor does dull when it dries, quite significantly actually. But if you add a variety of tones in there and you really build up the layers, you can create some really beautiful depth. And you can tell, like, I'm not really blocking anything out. It's just random. I'm just throwing paint around and water around. The biggest thing is finding balance in your composition. So now we're going to add a contrasting color. This is Marine Blue, which is my absolute favorite color in the entire world by Holbein, and as well as their Peacock Blue. And it's just like wonderful bluey, greeny, teal. Oh my gosh, it's just to die for. I add it in almost every painting because I can't help myself. Just some delicate details. I don't want to overwhelm the piece too much because there's already a lot of pink and green, so it's very minimal. And we're going to use the water and just really mix it up so that there's not really any like solid lines. It's all just a nice blendy wash. And just using the opera pink to create some implied flowers in the background. Obviously these three big flowers are the main forefront, but we're gonna just like create some implied flowers in the back. So when you think about in a photograph, the things further away are more blurry usually than the things in the foreground. And that's something to keep in mind when you're creating your composition is the depth of the things in your of the pieces in your art. That's what's going to create depth, is having the difference between really detailed close-up parts and more blurred out. It's called bokeh, if that's the right way to say that in photography. So now that the water's dried a little bit and it's really soaked into the paper, I'm going to go in with a really dark violet color. This is a mixture of opera and marine blue. I like to try and use the same colors to mix my shadows. It just seems to have more, it seems to be more harmonious. But when there's not like water floating on the surface, then it really allows the watercolor paints to soak into the paper. So we're just going to let this dry, and here we are. This is the dried product. This is a few hours later in the evening, so my lighting's a little bit different, but you can see it's kind of lightened up a bit, and it's a little more faded. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in, we're going to do one more layer to darken up those shadows and just add a little more detail to the foreground, so you can see where that green and blue came out. It's neat, and I really like the shape of it. It just doesn't feel done though. So I'm just taking that calligraphy brush and going in to just wet the areas that I'm going to work in, so that the water can really soak in before I add anything. And I also like to create a bit of a vignette effect using one of the colors I've used, just because when we take the tape off, then you can see the line, and it's really lovely. You'll see what I mean at the end here. But we're just taking the same colors that we used in the first bit. This is opera again. And we're just building up those layers again. And the quinacridone magenta. Ugh, that pink is just so pretty. I love it. I think every piece I've done, I've had that pink in it. And yes, so here's that dark purple, mixing the opera with the marine blue. I just mix it right beside it. And yeah, you can see I'm really going dark in the base there, where the shadows will be darkest in the flower. And this is that perylene green. I'm just pulling that down through the stem. I always like to fade out my stems into this just mass of greenery at the bottom usually, and it creates an effect of like a faded effect, so then people don't really know where it really ends. I think that adds to sort of the loose effect as well. Sorry, I'm a bit off screen here, but I was just mixing up a darker green. Just creating some implied foliage here, and then taking the water and just blending it out randomly. And again, just working in with that marine blue and creating some implied flowers. Nothing too detailed. Lots of water. Just kind of adding some interest to where the foliage is. The cool thing about watercolor is if you just take your, oh here you go, see I'm just kind of lightening up that bit because it was just getting a little too watery there. The cool thing with watercolor though, especially if you have a decent watercolor brush with a really nice tip, is that you can lay down the water and you put down the watercolor in one spot and it spreads throughout, so it's really you can get a really random effect if you know how to work it. I would definitely experiment, like especially making a swatch guide always helps. Not only to help show you how the colors interact, but also just to show you different sort of effects you can get. And again, we're just going to loosen it up here. Splotch some water all over it. I like doing a mixture of both light and dark splotches and then going in and blending them with water, because then it's not as chaotic, but it's still got lots going on. And as it dries too, all of those little dots will blend out more and not be quite so heavy. Lovely. I'm feeling quite happy with this. I don't want to go too much further because it's really easy to overwork a piece, especially if you're trying to do a loose composition. I think that anything more will be just over the top. So I'm just gonna let this dry now and be back in about an hour here. We're just gonna skip ahead. So you can really see how that purple is spread out. So here we go, we're pretty much dry. It's not fully dry, but it's pretty much dry. And you can already see it's kind of lightened up a little bit. But you can see what I mean with taking the tape off. This is just a green painter's tape. Make sure to use a lower tack so it doesn't rip your watercolor paper, especially if you're using a cheap watercolor paper. It will rip it and you'll be so sad. That's a puppy pad beneath it, which the painter's tape really sticks to and rips the hell out of. So, I mean, unless you're using a ton of water, you could just do it on a table, really. It is watercolor, it washes right off. It's not like the alcohol ink stuff that I do, where it's permanent. But you definitely want to use painter's tape, not scotch tape if you're doing watercolor, because scotch tape will just pick up. It needs to be specifically for paint. so you can see it's just ripping. Ugh. I'm done an audio overlay on this one, even though there's nothing going on, because there was a bee in my studio, so there's been occasional times where I run away screaming every so often, so I figured maybe no one wanted to hear that. There we go, in all its glory. Lovely loose watercolor with super vibrant colors. Holbein is my favorite brand, and Core actually is made by Golden acrylic paints. If you've worked with acrylics, you would probably have heard the name Golden. They make a watercolor called Core, Q-O-R, which is really fantastic too. It's really expensive though, so I use Holbein. And I'm just erasing some of my pencil marks, but you could totally leave them in there if you wanted. You could even do a pen overlay with details to just kind of, you know, add some more interest to it. But here is the final piece, up close and personal, so you can see it's like detailed but not. That's the best way I can describe it. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I look forward to creating more for you. Thank you!